We asked John Woodhouse to come over and make some presentations for us. He's going to be presenting throughout the conference numerous times. I've known John for a number of years. He was the first person, once we got wind of Past 55, I think back in 2005, came over to the U.S. and started talking about it. John's been a very big influence on IAM and their work. He's been a big influence on us and our work. And I was really fortunate this year that John included me on an invitation to a project he ran in Europe. I think he's going to tell you a little bit more about it here, called Salvo. You know, we've been, Scott, it was great to see Scott's presentation because he kind of took philosophies of ISO 55000 and asset management and told us what he was actually doing, moving into the verb part of it and just doing it. John put this group of companies together that were interested in the same thing and created a set of decision process and decision tools around deriving value from assets, whether to renew, whether to maintain, and which maintenance strategy would be best, or whether to do capital replacement. And I was stunned. It was one of the best conferences that I went to last year because they were all actual case studies of people who understand asset management and then moved it into the verb of doing to start to deliver immediate value, no matter where they were in their maturity matrix, starting to deliver value immediately using evidence. And so we knew we had to have him here at this conference. So without further ado, a warm welcome for John Woodhouse, please.
Thank you very much, Terry. And nice to see you all, guys. And what a nice place to come in the middle of winter. Any excuse to talk to interested people. As you've gathered already, the world of asset management is a fantastic cross-disciplinary excuse for a good chat. And I want to share with you today the product of quite a lot of this chat that's been going on about people struggling with a particular set of the common practical problems, which is what to do about the stuff that doesn't stay as good as it was designed to on the first day. And please, don't get me wrong. When I mention managing aging assets, I don't mean managing old assets only. Aging starts on day one. Switching it on. All right? And aging is not just about deterioration. In many cases, you can have an as-designed asset, perfectly functional, that is no longer so relevant because other designs have come on the market. It can be a relative term with regard to demand profiles, technology overtake, legislation, competency attrition, grey hair walking out the door, the skills to look after it disappearing. The asset itself is perfectly healthy, but our ability to exploit it, to use it, to look after it may be changing. All in the subject of aging. Aging with respect to a function. I've added on a specific example of that, which is the determination of when we step in and do something. And the reason for mentioning this one is that this is a really common area where we're making a right mess of it today. Determining when to replace stuff and then proving it to the person who's going to have to pay for it. So, talking to the topic that's been raised already today, how do we, as asset familiar people, talk to business-oriented people in a common language so that they get it? Well, actually I'm going to talk about the aging process in 3 circumstances and then home in on one of them as the example for today. I'll expand more in the workshop I'm running tomorrow afternoon in a more disciplined and systematic way, because this thing is now developed into a structured approach for tackling all the various problems we encounter of lack of data and competing opportunities. Let's walk our way through the asset's life cycle. And we start off with buying the right thing in the first place. David mentioned the problems of on time and on budget, getting in the way of doing the right thing. We've always been suffering from this because we separate the roles of people choosing to design stuff and purchase it and install it from those that use it and look after it later. So the natural tensions exist. Now, decisions in that circumstance are particularly vulnerable because we don't know how the asset's going to behave yet. We're guessing. In fact, we're about to spend a lot of big chunks of money when we are least supported by facts about the behavior of the asset. And the consequences of making the wrong decision we have to live with quite often for a long time. And tweaking it during its life can never be the same as getting it right in the first place. So high criticality, double, triple whammy stuff. During the asset's life, there's a constant tug of war going on between the asset users and the asset carers. People are trying to extract value from the assets. People are trying to protect the value of the assets. We know about that. You can't have it for maintenance, I'm using it. Well known. That tension is a trade-off. There's a best blend to be had, isn't there? Between uptime and performance and sustainability and operational efficiency and obviously costs and so on. Unfortunately, we never get quite to a point where we can say we've achieved steady state because the world is too dynamic. We have to be adaptive. And that's particularly true as we start to see a cliff edge looming where it's no longer sustainable in terms of how we look after stuff. We might be considering having to replace it, God forbid, or do a major refurbishment to extend its operable life, or modify it to meet new operating conditions and demands. We're back in the game of having to spend big lumps of money again. Now, at least in this circumstance, we've got some knowledge about how the asset has behaved so far. But if we just look at hindsight, what it has done and what its condition is, how can we evaluate what the future options are when we've faced with so many different rates of change of technology and legislation and everything again? We're back to the front end of a new life cycle. Tricky. Well, it gets worse. The complexity of this subject is accelerating. Due to various industrial revolution timescales and political short-sightedness in many cases, we have a very large volume of basically aging and aged, that is old, infrastructure. In the US alone, the backlog is estimated at about $1 trillion. UK, we've only got a couple of $100 billion to spend to get back into steady state of some sort. This is big stuff. We have much greater expectations placed upon, are we doing the right thing for the right reason, at the right time, at the right price, to the right quality? Everybody's breathing down our neck. So this asset management approach has got to be more than just good intentions. We've got to develop the infrastructure for demonstrating what is right and how much of it's worth doing and when it's worth doing. Rate of change in the technology itself means that we're constantly seeking for new ways of achieving the same outcomes at a better price, at a better quality, more sustainably, and so on. And if you're talking long-term, in something like a telecommunications area, long-term perhaps might be 12 months. If you're building roads or bridges, long-term might be 150 years. These terms are very context-dependent, aren't they? Obviously, we don't have unlimited budgets, and we've got another problem with regards to knowledge turnover. Transition. No shortage of clever stuff we could do. In fact, the toolbox of managing assets is scary. It's got lots of three-letter acronyms, all of which are heavily sold as the fantastic solution for a large chunk of the problem. In fact, usually slightly oversold. Which bits are useful in what circumstances is becoming a full-time profession in its own right. You have to go on all these conferences to find out what they're all about. Keeps Terry very busy. But the bit that's missing, and the reason what I want to share with you today about the collaboration we've been involved in the last few years, has been they've all got a weak link, which is the final step. There's lots of good stuff about what's the nature of the problem and which way should you jump, but not the bang for the buck part. How do we turn it into a value proposition? How do we turn it into benefits argument? or business case language. That final translation of technical issues and sensible, logical outcomes through to value for money words. That's what we've just spent the last few years trying to get our head around. What are the generic principles that we have to apply and the practical steps we need to put in place to address that? So we launched something called the Salvo Project. Somebody came up with the acronym. You've got to have a good acronym, haven't you, to make a project. Strategic assets, that's kind of hinting at long-term thinking. Life cycle, not just looking after stuff, but the whole life cycle consideration. Got to get the value word in now that ISO is coming on board. And management of trade-off, the long O word, the best blend. What we set out was, how could we demonstrate that we're doing the right thing for the right reason at the right time? How can we prove it to different audiences, like the guy who's going to have to pay for it? Like the guys who are going to have to implement the tasks. It's not just enough to tell them what to do. The why is actually a very powerful influence on their motivations and commitment. Anyway, basically it's a collaboration project to write down the good stuff and demonstrate it by practical example. As Terry introduced, it's actually a very interesting cross-industry experience sharing exercise. We've got petrochem, we've got power generation, we've got transport, we've got civil engineering, we've got manufacturing, we've got process, pharmaceutical, technologies. Not proud, quite happy to learn from anybody. And what we wrote down as a result were the practical tips that were generic, that were universally applicable immediately. It turned out that there are 6 must-do steps. And we can organize those steps into a nice pretty pattern. We call it the Salvo Smiley. Guaranteed to put a smile on your face. We know that we've got to sort out the wood from the trees. Which problems are most urgent to solve? Which headaches are the biggest? And most organizations have got some concepts of risk ranking or criticality going on already. But what we found is that actually there's a second dimension we need at this stage. How big is the headache was one of them, for sure. Which issues are big or small? The timing sensitivity is the other dimension. How close to the edge of the cliff are you standing right now? How urgent is it for you to intervene? So if you think about it, how big is the cliff and how close to the edge are we standing? Well, that's the thing that focuses attention. Which problems are most urgent to address? They hold the biggest opportunity. We are not good at being disciplined about characterizing the problem clearly. One person's definition of the problem will be completely different to another person's manifestation of it. So clear problem statement is itself a step. Most organizations have some principles of root cause analysis and problem investigation, but they're mostly using them post-mortem, after the event. What we found in the Salvo work is that you can apply a lot of the same principles ahead of the game in threat analysis. What's on the horizon? We're talking about aging. What happens if we don't do something? Why would that occur? Why? Similar principles. There's a bunch of checklist criteria that are particularly powerful to make sure we're solving the right problem. Medicines. It's very well noticing we've got an illness ahead, we've got a concern, whether it's an asset health or a business health problem. The toolkits that are out there right now, the RCMs and the FMEAs and the RBIs, the decision trees of if red, turn left. They're actually a very narrow band of potential solutions to consider. RCM gives you 5 basic maintenance strategies as mutually exclusive choices, case by case. Salvo work, we found 42. I'll show you them in a second. Quite a lot of them do not involve doing anything to the asset at all, what we call the non-asset solutions. Some of them are free. Solve the problem at no cost. Great idea. Forcing the lateral thinking is that step. Getting people to think outside the box about problem elimination, perhaps, or mitigation. Here's a very common problem. How do we talk turkey? When a particular proposal is on the table to do something like replace the asset or or not to replace it, to modify it instead, or to buy a spare just in case, or to train the operator differently, or to take out an insurance policy. The bang for the buck equation differs. How are we helping people right now to articulate the value for money justification for that proposal? The inconsistency is scary. People do use certain terms, tools like net present value or cost-benefit analysis. They use them very inconsistently. And use different techniques are necessary for different types of solution, particularly when we have fuzzy information. I'll talk about that in a second. The top-down so far has been drilling down into what might be worth doing in the nature of the headaches we're facing. The bottom-up part of the smiley is about the justification of what is worth individually and collectively. What we find at this stage is that justification of doing a particular task on a particular asset for a particular reason at a particular time has to be modified by all the other stuff you've got to do. There are two types of modification we found. We've called them blending and bundling. Now, blending is the multiple things you do to the same asset or the same system that interfere with each other. We can do more of this, which would mean we don't need to do so much of that. Okay, take a specific example. If we clean a heat exchanger more often to recover the energy efficiency, the damage we do by opening it and scraping it and closing it shortens its life. So there's a short-term gain for long-term pain. There's a trade-off between how efficient we want to be and how long-lasting we want to be. There's a blend that has to be obtained. Bundling is to do with delivery. Lots of stuff to do to lots of assets. What's the best way of making it happen? Now, there are shared resources, there's shared downtime, there's shared overheads, there's things that say, let's do these together, even though it results in stuff being done at its suboptimal timing. Bring it forward to share an access opportunity, delay it to take a risk, to share the downtime. Though shutdown planning would fall into that category very well. The final stage is the bit that keeps the CFO happy, which is what's the combined significance to the business in buckets that he understands. Buckets called capital investment plans, operating expenditure programs, residual risk forecasts, asset performance and uptimes and efficiency characteristics, aggregating the implications of what is actually worth doing. Now, top-down targeting and bottom-up justification retains transparency. If we can argue for this intensity of expenditure, and then for every item on that list, demonstrate why and when, based on which issue it's addressing, and that it is clearly understood, and it is appropriately identified and targeted, we're in a totally different game. So how do we do it in practice? Well, firstly, there are different starting points. We're not just talking about greenfield. Let's develop our approaches from first principles. Every organization is already doing stuff today. And in many cases, one's cutting straight into this process at the stuff that I'm proposing to do, is it really worth it? How much of it? Terry mentioned the concept of maintenance strategies or renewal strategies. Well, I've got a capital investment plan. Which bits of it can I afford not to do within limited resources? That would be an example of coming straight in at the screening stage, the value for money screening. If we do have a particular headache, pops up, bad actor come up from your reports, we don't have to identify that it exists or not. We're asking the why question straight away. And occasionally, we're doing a first principles review of which headaches are how scary, and then drilling down into them. The different starting points. Tie-ins for the execution commitments. Again, what we really want to do is not just get the right decisions, but make sure the conclusions are accepted and understood and implemented. I've seen many, many, many clever studies done, lots of analysis done, resulting in some really beautiful graphs and nice thick reports, and nothing happened. Even though the conclusions are right and everybody agrees with them, that stage of moving from good intentions to actually execution step was missing. The transition of responsibility from making a decision to ownership and measuring the effectiveness of the resulting outcomes. That's true also for the work programs and in feeding into the money that we have to spend on our assets. I said the menu was quite big. Well, there's the 42 that we cut it down to. And I stress we did cut it down to that. We bundled them down to merely 42. And you can see they actually cover all aspects of the asset life cycle. And what's interesting is the proportion of them that do not involve a technical intervention on the asset. How many people in this room think about non-asset interventions to solve an asset-related problem? Really simple case I came across recently. Proposed massive investment in online condition monitoring. Good business case. What proportion of early warning alarm bells could be triggered and reacted to quickly enough compared to the current trips and alarms and problems they're having? Nobody asked the simple question. How many of those problems could have been eliminated if we spent 2 hours training the operators on what symptoms to look for? The answer was about 50–60% of them. Not all, about 50–60%. Or at least half. Now, the business case for the online system, which cost about $500,000, is in fact not, shall we detect problems or not? It's, shall we detect sufficiently extra problems compared to what the operator could have done? That's the incremental benefit for the incremental technology. In fact, it did not justify spending the money. It was better to solve only 50% of the price, 50% of the problem, for effectively no cost. That's an asset management decision, taking an asset management viewpoint. Value for money, not just, that sounds sexy, let's do that. Or what can I get away with my budget? Those aren't asset management. Canny, are they? I want to rob something from some work that was done further back than the Salvo project. We took a lot of groundwork that was done in the late 1990s under something called the Macro Initiative. One of them, which I'm particularly fond of, is this shamrock diagram. I hope there's nobody from Ireland here because they'll notice that shamrock's got a different number of leaves. But basically, this is a very, very useful way of making sure we're thinking about the whole picture. We had some questions a bit earlier about the tie-in between quality and environment and business value and so on. Well, actually, funnily enough, this is quite a good way of answering that question. Around the outside, there are typical things that the outside world wants from you. Stakeholder expectations, in posh words. It's very simple that every organization in this room, I would challenge you to disagree with the following. You want safe, reliable, long-lasting, cost-efficient, high-performing, high-quality, customer-satisfying, reputationally impeccable, environmentally responsible, and regulator compliance. Does anybody not want that lot? Put it all together, it's called a mission statement. Yeah? It's merely a reflection of the expectations pulling us in different directions. Simply listing it helps nobody. It's like saying, get out of your seat, run in that direction as fast as you can. Oh, and while you're at it, please run in that direction as well. Oh, and also climb this ladder at the same time, please. You don't know where even to start. Now, what was insightful in the macro work was how do you scale the elastic that's pulling you in these different directions? And we found there are only 5 techniques for scaling the elastic that's tugging you. There's a probabilistic one. There's a capital valuation over time one. There's an operational efficiency one, what you're putting in for what you're getting out. And if we were totally selfish, those 3 would be enough. Simple test. If there's 0 risk, infinite life, and 100% efficiency, would there be any scope for improvement? Now, we don't live in an island. The outside world overrides or modifies our desires on top, and it does it in 2 further ways. Does it by obligation. We're told to do stuff, whether or not the risks and sustainabilities and efficiencies justify it. We pay a premium for compliance on top. And we coined a term called the shine factors to cover all those other aspects of value, the perception, the reputation, the morale, the ones that involve human perception, the intangibles. And the way of scaling their significance in a specific decision, such as what to do and when, is an indirect one. What would we like to do to keep certain groups happy, the happiness factor, versus what the numbers would suggest we should do. And the difference is the premium you're paying for shine. Now that actually becomes tangible dollars. Dollars value of an intangible. Indirect technique. Works very well indeed. Okay, in the course of the Salvo project, we've bundled the structured thinking into a set of templates. Those 42 different techniques. We grouped them according to the questions that need to be asked, the math that needs to be done to handle the trade-offs, and the what-ifs that you have to do to consider and compare different options. So you can get an idea of them. There's the diagnostic area, there's the intrusive maintenance areas, there's the step changes and modifications, there's the renewals and refurbishments, there's the bundling, the blending, and the consolidation of the results. What I wanted to show you is what some of that structured thinking looks like. Those that come along to the workshop, we'll do some live examples together, and I'm giving a couple of case studies on Thursday, I think it is. First of all, organize the thinking into a sequential debate. This is a catalyst for asking the right questions of the right people. Make sure we understand what the questions need to be to answer a particular, to evaluate a particular option, and of whom. Because asset management decision-making is always cross-disciplinary. And harnessing that in a linear way, decision-specific storyboards, make sure that you haven't missed part of the shamrock. Short-term versus long-term, yours versus mine, asset users versus asset carers, design versus operations. Yeah? There is some nasty number crunching, but you guys know that because you're involved in maintenance reliability. There's all that renewal theory and reliability mathematics and discounted cash flow stuff to go on behind the scenes. But the sweet spot we're looking for is the best blend between these competing bits of elastic tugging us in different directions. The point is we need to demonstrate where that is and the consequences of doing too much or too little. In other words, the slope either side. How much we would suffer if we didn't do something or if we delayed it. How much more it would be. Now, it could be because of inefficiencies or risks or reliability, whatever. Now, this stuff's been around for a long time in fairly academic circles. What we wanted to do is find a way which we could harness the clever stuff with the structured thinking of the human processes side and bring those two together. What we found was, first of all, presume fuzziness. In the debates, in asking the questions about how long something might last, what would happen if it fell over, what's the degree of customer satisfaction, worth, that checklist of questions. Presume uncertainty in the answer. Go straight away for the optimistic and pessimistic boundaries. Test for credibility. In fact, we developed a technique we call the Sherlock Holmes method. Sherlock Holmes, remember the books? If you eliminate the impossible, what you're left with must include the truth. Don't ask, what is the probability of a failure? Say, could it be 99% chance of failing in the next 10 minutes? Seek the rejection. Seek the no way, it couldn't be. Then move the boundary and watch the body language from the no way through to the I don't know. You've just transitioned the credibility boundary. Seek the incredible, cut it out the way. What you're left with must include the truth. Now, that's a simple example. With the workshop, we'll go into much more detail on that. But it does allow us, straight away, to talk about the implications of short-term, long-term, of cost, of risk, of trade-off, the justification for interventions, of maintenance, refurbishments, inspections, renewals, in a consolidated way, in dollars, in a pessimistic and optimistic. Therefore, the range for the decision. Organizing the knowledge into its elements, there are certain tips we've learned along the way. For a start, There is an enormous amount of effort going into data analytics today, both data acquisition and data analytics. How much of that is productive? I'm going to challenge you on something really quite fundamental to this particular conference, which is, don't we just love data? How much of it is being productively used? And do we even know how to use it properly? Actually, there's so much focus on capturing more information about assets and analyzing the hell out of it. I want to give you a visualization. Asset management, as we're talking about it in this particular event, the stream of this event, is more about looking outside the front of your car than looking in the rearview mirror. You ever tried driving along the highway only looking in the rearview mirror? That's high-risk asset management. Yeah? Okay, we'll add the dashboard. Real-time condition monitoring. We've got a dashboard. It tells us the temperature, the fuel, everything else. Okay, you're now allowed a dashboard and a rearview mirror. And trying to drive through rain, fog, cars and vehicles and wild animals are on the road ahead. We've got to get looking forwards. And that's going to be more than just data analytics. The human factors part, the how to ask the question, and getting the right people in the room is at least, if not more important, and capturing that uncertainty about that future. This is actually an example of an asset renewal decision, and what we're looking at here is the cumulative view of all the factors involved turned into dollars implications. Everything's got to end up in dollars. We can't have part of the equation in points and another one in dollars. We've got to put it into horse-tradable, demonstrable contributions to a total. And the total impact, I'm going to use the term impact rather than value. Value can be a word that, although it is absolutely right, impact has slightly more teeth when you're talking to people who are going to spend money for you. Impact the business. It's not just life cycle cost. Don't go that far. Cost implies cash flow outwards. Impact is lost opportunity, it's risk, it's pain turned into dollars, as well as the cost, of course. So what we're looking for is the best value impact, the least pain to the organization. The sensitivity analysis doesn't just find out the tolerances associated with a decision. The don't step in before here and don't leave it longer than this. It's very easy, if you've got that capability, to put a price on the uncertainty itself. How badly could you be wrong? And the salvo experiences are, that is a deliverable for a good decision, is the degree of robustness. It's part of the making the right decision. That vulnerability. In this particular case, the uncertainty said that the pump, it was an old pump, should be replaced somewhere between 4 and 10 years. That's a pretty wide range, isn't it? But if you calculate, and I mean it is math, calculate the least worst timing to do, given the uncertainty, it came out at 6 years. And the worst it could be wrong, that decision, if you chose 6 years, the worst it could be wrong, in other words, if the pessimistic turns out to be true, or conversely, if the optimistic turns out to be true, the worst it could be wrong, 176K. That's the cost of your uncertainty, the potential cost, the maximum cost. Incidentally, that's therefore the budget for getting better data in the future. Wouldn't be worth spending more than that, would it? Now we're starting to talk real value focus, even on which pieces of information are worth collecting. Scenarios. I gave you a sample of a whole bunch of things that we could do in assets. It isn't just a, shall I do this, yes or no. Is that particular option has a certain attractiveness, certain business case. Yep, it's worth this much. The net gain is this much. Whereas we, I don't know, 80% of that for 15% of the cost this way. At some point there was a comparison of options, even before we get into that blending stuff I mentioned earlier. Is it worth refurbishing rather than replacing? Different cost mix, different impact mix. We're able to demonstrate why what might appear to be superficially attractive is in fact, in total impact terms, worse. As I said earlier, if we've got a whole bunch of projects on the table, which ones can we afford not to do? What are we walking away? What are we leaving on the table by turning down a particular investment proposal or procurement or replacement? The Salvo project has been, over the last 3 years, trying to find out what is universally applicable. It's come up with not just these big 6 steps, it's developed a series of templates. The templates on the storyboard side for all 42 types of things to evaluate to make sure we cover all the bases and do the right maths, but also worked examples. And what we've tried to do is make sure we cover all the different industry sectors and the different asset types and all the decision types, so you don't have to start from scratch. I'm very, very pleased to say that what we've seems to have developed is pretty much a universal toolkit of how do we make the right decision and keep it transparent. Basically, what we found is that if we get rid of the jargon layer, get down below that into the sort of shamrock structure we talked about, and we talk about what does risk mean to you, and what does sustainability mean to you, and what does operating efficiency mean to you, in your words, then actually this method is just common sense. In fact, what we also found, and this was a surprise, is the degree to which you don't even need new data or new information. Somewhere, somebody already knows the answer in your organization. So the biggest priority is making sure that person is identified and the right question is asked of that person in the right way. In the right way is really important. It changes the willingness or reluctance to participate and share that knowledge enormously. We've all come across a situation where people regard their knowledge as their job security. All right? Actually, you can reverse that. And some of the tips we've developed in the tacit knowledge capture, the collecting people's experience together and putting dollar value to that, has been very powerful indeed. As I say, we've got over 30 case studies now. I've just done a working average of that. On average, they've saved about $1 million a year compared to current practice. Usually within half a day. That's been the gobsmacking part of this. With a process familiar person facilitating the discussion and doing live what-ifs, somewhere around 2 to 3 hours, it's all that's needed for the right people around the table to turn a technical versus business argument into business case justified, which way to jump, how far to jump, and when. The outright prize right now is in the area of obsolescence management. I'm not sure whether that's because we're getting it wrong so much or whether the implications are automatically big, but we haven't had a single case where we've looked at obsolescence management and found that currently people are doing the right thing at the right time. The too little, too late habit is fairly well entrenched. The scary rate of change. Incidentally, here's a test case. If you are competing 2 big projects of asset investment, one to buy a new piece of technology for a new functional purpose, something new and bright and sexy and interesting, one to replace an asset that is degrading, like for like, which one gets the money? The new and interesting stuff, isn't it? Yeah? The necessary evil of replacing something you've already got automatically gets pushed back as far as it can. Now, the obsolescence situation is a combination of both. You've got non-sustainable existing asset and the sexy new idea of the innovation, the new technology coming along to displace it, plus a whole bunch of secondary headaches of sustainability of the supports of the old, the spare parts, the competency and losses, and all the other things I mentioned. That's over $30 million in a single decision that took somewhere between 2 and 3 hours compared to current methods. I think the thing I want to round on is the behavior change aspects that we've learned from the Salvo project, which is how relatively simple steps can equip guys like you to talk the other language. And once you've got that self-confidence and the transparency of evidence, the audit trail, the whole game changes. It genuinely builds that bridge between the different interests. It's not just the finance guys, it's also the regulators. You can demonstrate why something's worthwhile and what it would cost to meet even higher standards. Is it worth it? That's the tip of a big iceberg. Thank you very much.
Fantastic.